Hello everyone, my name is Victor Lai with Bellwether Capital Management and welcome to part 2 of Learn About Bonds. In part 1, we provided a basic summary of what a bond is, and in part 2, we'll take a closer look at how bonds work. We will also take a closer look at why people invest in bonds. We already talked about returns being one obvious reason, but there are other reasons as well. And then last, we'll cover some basic but important considerations that we should understand when we invest in bonds. Okay, so how does a bond work? Well, if you recall from part 1, a bond is basically like a loan where the seller is the borrower and the buyer is the lender. In this example on this page, we will look at a bond from the buyer's perspective, from the investor's perspective. We're going to invest in a newly issued bond with a $100 par value, 5 years to maturity, and a 5% coupon rate. This diagram shows what the cash flows would look like over the 5-year period. So today, we pay $100 to buy the bond as an investment, which we're going to hold. In year 1, we receive the first coupon payment, which is $5. And if we continue to hold the bond, then we will continue to receive $5 coupon payments every year until the bond matures. A quick side note, those payments are fixed. They don't change, and that's one reason why bonds are commonly called fixed income investments. Now, at year 5, the bond matures. That means in addition to the final $5 coupon payment, the $100 par value or principal value comes due, and so it is also returned. So in year 5, we get $105 in total. And in aggregate, over the entire 5 years, we received $125 in return for lending $100. So we got $25 in interest or a 25% return. And that's it. That's basically how a typical bond works from an investor's perspective. Now, and I guess it would be also how it works from the borrower's perspective. It would just take the other side of this diagram. Now, the next question is, why do investors buy bonds? Obviously, interest is one reason, but generally speaking, the expected return on a bond is going to be lower than that of a commensurate equity investment like a stock. So return clearly is not the only reason why people buy bonds. Here are a few other reasons. First is certainty, which is a form of safety. We said earlier bond interest payments are usually fixed. Not only are they fixed, but they are also guaranteed to be paid by the issuer. And remember how the par value was also returned at maturity? Well, that is also guaranteed. So compare that with a stock investment where nothing is guaranteed. We're not guaranteed to get our principal back if we buy a stock. And even if a stock pays a dividend, well, that dividend is paid at the company's discretion. It's not an explicit obligation or guarantee. And so the point is, bonds offer much more certainty about cash flows and value, and that certainty creates safety. A second reason is priority, which is another form of safety. In a separate series called Learn About Stocks, we review the concept of capital structure, and we talk about how bonds are higher up in the capital stack than stocks are. And ultimately, that just means that if a company fails and it goes bankrupt, bond investors are paid back first before stock investors. In other words, bond investors have priority over stock investors in a liquidation, and that obviously makes bonds safer than stocks. A third reason is volatility, which again has to do with safety. Like we discussed in part 1, after bonds are issued, they trade on the bond market, and so their prices will fluctuate and be volatile. But generally speaking, bond prices are less volatile than stock prices. That's because, of course, bonds have guarantees that stocks don't. In addition to that, bond prices can actually help with diversification benefits for a portfolio because bond prices can move inversely with stock prices. In other words, when stock prices fall, bond prices can go up, and vice versa. So those two characteristics, the lower volatility along with the inverse price movements, they both add to the perceived safety of bonds. The last reason I will point out is liquidity, which yet again affects safety. We talked in part one about how the bond market is one of the largest and deepest financial markets in the world. That means that in part there are lots of participants transacting in bonds, and that creates liquidity. So liquidity is important for any tradable investment because in order to buy or sell, we need a counterparty to take the other side of our trade. So the liquid nature of the bond market adds to the perceived safety of bonds. Now, one caveat I'll point out is that not all bonds are liquid. Even if the bond market at large is liquid, a specific individual bond could still be illiquid and hard to trade if there are not enough interested parties. But of course, that is true for any tradable investment. It's not something that's exclusive to bonds. So notice that most of the reasons behind bond investments involve some element of safety, right? And so the bottom line is that bonds are generally seen as safer, less risky investments relative to stocks. And that makes them important because not everyone can or wants to take on the risk that comes with equity investments like stocks. Next, we move on to some considerations about bond investing. And the main thing to recognize is that even though bonds come with guarantees, that doesn't mean they are free of any risk. At a minimum, bonds are still subject to market risk. Some bonds can be quite risky, and the more risky a bond is, the more volatile its market price will be. Here are a few things that can affect bond price volatility, assuming all else is equal. First is credit quality. We said that bond principal and interest payments are guaranteed by the issuer. Well, that guarantee is really just a promise of repayment, and a promise is only as good as whoever's making it, right? So all bonds and bond issuers, they all are graded based on their credit worthiness. So they will all have a credit rating. So just like you and I, the better our credit is, the less interest we pay, and vice versa. The same is true with bonds. The lower the credit quality, the higher the interest payments. In addition, the lower the credit quality, the more volatile market price tends to be. And that's because it reflects the uncertainty of the bond. If lenders are uncertain about the promise of repayment, then they will demand higher interest payments as well as larger price concessions when buying and selling that bond. And so that's why the bond prices become more volatile. Second is maturity. All else equal, the longer a bond's maturity is, the more volatile its market price will be. This is because bond coupon payments are generally fixed for the life of the bond. So an investor who buys a 10-year bond is making a long-term commitment, 10 years of fixed payments and waiting 10 years for the return of principal. That's a long time and a lot can happen. So that creates uncertainty in terms of opportunity cost. What if something better comes along? And that uncertainty is reflected in higher price volatility. We'll explore this concept more in the following pages, but for now, the takeaway is simply that longer maturity tends to lead to more price volatility. Third is something called optionality. In part one, we talked about how bonds can have different features. Well, one of those features is an embedded option. That basically means the bond can be bought or sold at a predetermined price prior to maturity. So we already know that bonds promise to return principal at maturity. In other words, the price is known at maturity. However, prior to maturity, the bond price can fluctuate. And so what an embedded option does is it provides some additional certainty for bond price during the life of the bond. Now that option can either give the issuer the right to buy back the bond at a set price, which is called a call option, or it can give the buyer the right to sell the bond back to the issuer at a set price. That's called a put option. Either way, when an option is present, that tends to reduce the volatility of the bond price because there is more certainty about the price. Fourth is inflation. Generally speaking, inflation is bad for bond investors, particularly for the typical fixed rate bonds that we've been talking about. Now, some bonds can have variable interest rates or adjustments for inflation, but we're not talking about those bonds. When bonds have fixed coupon payments, inflation will erode the value of those payments over time. It also erodes the value of the principal that will be returned in the future. So from a bond buyer's perspective, high or rising inflation is a bad thing. However, inflation actually can work in the issuer's, in the seller's favor. If an issuer borrows $100 today and returns it 10 years later, well, that $100 will be worth a lot less in 10 years if inflation is high or rising. Of course, the opposite is also true. Deflation or negative inflation is good for the bond investor and bad for the issuer. The bottom line is if inflation is either high, low, or just moving, that tends to increase the amount of bond price volatility. Now, fifth and the last thing we'll talk about here are interest rates. We already know that bonds come with a stated interest rate, and that's what we've been calling a coupon rate, and we know that doesn't change. But of course, like we talked about, market interest rates do change. They change all the time based on market conditions, economic conditions, and what banks and the government are doing, and so on. So changes in market rates will lead to changes in bond prices. In other words, changes in interest rates tend to increase bond price volatility. I save this point for last because this is one of the most important considerations when it comes to bond prices, the influence that market rates have on bond prices. This is something called interest rate risk. So the general rule for interest rate risk is that interest rates and bond prices have an inverse relationship. That means if interest rates go up, then bond prices go down, and vice versa. To understand why that happens, let's take another look at our 5-year bond example. So remember, we go ahead and buy the bond for $100 today. And then let's say we hold the bond for a whole year. So after 1 year, that bond, it's now a 4-year bond because it has 4 years remaining. But it still has the same 5% coupon rate and the same $5 coupon payment every year. Those things don't change. But what if interest rates change? What if market rates move up and by the end of year 1, a newly issued 4-year bond is paying 6% in interest? Well, now our 5% bond looks a lot less attractive. And if we go out and we try to sell our 5% bond for $100, which is what we paid, well, no one's going to want to buy it because they can now buy a newly issued bond that pays 6% interest for the same price. So the only way that we're going to entice buyers to accept our bond is to lower our sales price. So if we offer to sell it, for example, let's say for $96, well, now a buyer could buy the bond for $96 today, and then when the bond matures, the buyer will receive $100 back at maturity. So the buyer will receive some capital appreciation in bond price, $4 in appreciation, in addition to the $5 coupon payments. So that combination of total return might be enough incentive for a buyer to accept our 5% bond instead of the 6% bonds that would be available. And so that's basically it. That's how and why interest rate movements affect bond prices. One question you may have at this point is, can we determine how much a bond's price will move when interest rates move? And the answer is yes, that can be estimated, and that's the last thing we'll talk about in this presentation. Bond price sensitivity to interest rates can be measured by something called duration. A bond's duration tells us how much a bond's price can be expected to move when interest rates move by 1%. Again, it tells us how much a bond's price can be expected to move when interest rates move by 1%. There is a formula for calculating a common form of duration on the left side of this page, but formulas aren't really important for our purposes. All we really need to understand right now is a simple rule of thumb that says duration is roughly equal to a bond's maturity. So for example, if we have a 10-year bond, that bond will have a duration measure of 10. That means if interest rates rise by 1%, then the bond's price can be expected to fall, to decrease by 10%, and vice versa. Now that also means that long-term bonds have higher duration than short-term bonds. That relationship is shown by the seesaw diagram that we see on this page. So a long-term bond would be like sitting on the end of the seesaw. So even a small movement in interest rates could create a large movement in bond prices. That reflects high duration. Meanwhile, short-term bonds would be like sitting near the center of the seesaw. Even a large movement in rates would not cause a large movement in bond price, and that reflects low duration. And that's it. That basically is duration in a nutshell. And this also wraps up our talk on bonds. Now at this point, you probably understand more about bonds than the average person cares to know. So congratulations, you made it to the end. Now I know that we went over a lot of stuff, so I'm going to provide a quick summary before we end the presentation. Okay, so from an investor's perspective, buying a bond is kind of like buying a stream of cash flows that are paid according to a clearly defined schedule. So that predictable nature and the low uncertainty of bonds makes them relatively safe investments, and that's one of the main reasons why investors will buy them. However, that doesn't mean that bonds are totally free of any and all risk. I mean, bonds at the very least are still going to be subject to market risk, and bond prices can still be volatile. How much bond prices will move are going to depend on a number of things. That includes credit quality, optionality, inflation, and of course, interest rates. Bond price sensitivity to interest rates is called interest rate risk, and it can be measured by duration. And of course, we just learned that a shortcut for duration is that it is roughly equal to a bond's maturity. Okay, so that wraps up this series on bonds. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, please like and subscribe. You can also learn more about BCM, what we do, and how we can help, as well as find more content at our website and social media pages. All the links are below in the description. Thanks again for watching, and please stay tuned for additional information about this video.